Number 20. When I was around the age of 12 or 13, my father told me and the rest of the family a story about my kidnapping almost being successful. It went along like this. This all happened when I was a newborn. My folks were never as happy when they finally held me in their hands and arms. After the birth, Mum and Dad were informed that they had to take me somewhere afterwards. The doctor asked one of the nurses to take me somewhere. She took me somewhere far away from my parents. Creepily, after the doctor handed me over to her, the nurse did nothing but stare at me for quite some time. Dad said it's because of how beautiful I looked when I was born. Then, all of a sudden, the nurse had this sudden urge to take me somewhere, to take me away. So, while the nurse is making her way down to the first floor, my dad is following right on her tail. He had known some bullshit was going on when I didn't return for some time. My dad can be a scary guy at sometimes, especially towards others who don't know him. Anyway, the nurse is on the first floor. She makes her way to the door, and the electronic door slides open. By the time she steps a foot out of the hospital, my dad yells out,
"Hey, where are you going with my baby?"
The nurse was stunned to the point of shitting her pants.
"Oh, I'm sorry. Here you go."
So after the nurse handed me over to my father, my dad noticed how quickly she just vanished, as if she never existed. To this day, I have two theories in my mind. The first theory is that the nurse probably had a stillborn and decided to take drastic measures to kidnap me. The second, the nurse couldn't have kids, so she decided to take one and make it her own. Overall, I'm glad my dad arrived just at the right time. If he wasn't there, I don't know what would have happened to me. Knowing my folks, if the kidnapping was successful, they probably would have hunted her down within minutes. And that's what I love about my family. They don't play that shit. Who the hell do you think you are, kidnapping someone's baby? You got some damn nerve.
Number 19.
So, this happened quite a long time ago now, but I haven't been able to forget about it. I might have been 13 or so, maybe 14 years old when I was still easily scared, and my best friend at the time was really into horror movies. We watched a bunch together and used to have a marathon movie night during our sleepovers. She was usually unaffected by these and could enjoy them whilst also laughing at me, who was always hiding behind a pillow and jumping at every scare. This particular night, we had been watching the movie Mirrors, or rather, she watched it while I was taking cover behind pillows as always. Once the movie was finished, we went to bed. Her bed was slightly bigger than a single bed, but with both of us in it, there wasn't much space, so we were always sleeping really close to each other. I convinced her to let me sleep closest to the wall since I was still a bit jumpy from the movie, and it didn't help that she had those mirror sliding doors on her closet. After a bit of teasing, she let me have the side closest to the wall, and we went to sleep. She lived in an apartment, and she didn't have any blinds on her window, so the light from the street seeped into the room, so it wasn't pitch black, meaning you could make out the objects in the room fairly clear. I didn't have any trouble falling asleep, but I woke up after a while. I can't say after how long, but it was still dark outside. At first, I didn't know why I'd woken up, being in that confused and disorientated, newly awake state. And since I know I'm a light sleeper and can be woken up by the most insignificant things, I didn't even open my eyes and just tried to go back to sleep again. Since the bed was small, both my friend and I slept on our sides in order to fit, and I had my hand next to my face. That's when I realized what had woken me up. Just below the palm of my hand, there was a light tapping, very rhythmic. I felt fear creep up on me, but I tried to brush it off as my friend probably having trouble falling asleep and wanting to wake me up for company or something. I opened up my eyes, and it was my friend who was tapping two other fingers on my wrist. I can tell her eyes are open, and she's smiling. Now, don't ask me how I knew this, but my instinct told me she wasn't awake. Somehow I knew she was still sleeping, even though her eyes were wide open. She didn't say a word to me, but the tapping on my wrist stopped, but her smile didn't fade. And then suddenly, she just waved at me. At this point, I'm so scared I don't even dare to wake her up. So I turn around and face the wall, with my back towards her, and I try both not to cry and also not to fall asleep as quickly as possible. I still feel her eyes on me, but do my best to ignore it, and eventually I fall back to sleep. I told her about this when we woke up the next morning. At first, she just started laughing at me and said I was probably still hung up on the horror movie we'd watched, but I insisted it wasn't a dream. She didn't remember anything though, and she didn't seem to even believe me either. That is, until the next time we saw each other at school. I had left her house on Saturday morning, and we didn't see each other until the lunch break on Monday. She came up to me and pulled me to the side and asked me to once again tell her what I had experienced that night. I told her again, expecting her to laugh again, but she didn't. She proceeded to tell me that her parents told her that the night after I'd left, meaning Saturday or Sunday, her parents had woken up because she was in their room, tapping on their window in a rhythmic pace, and when they had tried to talk to her, she hadn't responded. Thinking she was just sleepwalking, although having no history of ever having done it before, they led her back to her room and put her back to bed. She was just staring at them the whole time, eyes wide open and smiling, just the way she had done to me. But she wasn't awake, and she doesn't remember a thing. It never happened again, at least not that I know of, but it still freaks me out to this day. I know nothing serious happened and nobody was in any danger, but waking up like that in the middle of the night with your friend downright staring at you and smiling creepily, it's not something that you easily forget. Number 18. About a year ago, my mum and I and our dog lived together in a home bungalow in a packed urban area. We rarely get any crime other than your stolen bike and whatnot. Anyway, one night around 9 PM, I remembered that I had to dry my shoes off for school the next day, as my school has a uniform policy and we need a particular style of shoe. I would usually put them in the airing cupboard in our bathroom where there is a large insulated heater that never fails to dry clothing or shoes. But on this occasion, my mum was in the bath, so that meant I would have to put them in the other heating room we have, which is more of a closet located in the other end of the house. The first thing I noticed was that the window beside the door was open, which is unusual. I thought nothing of it and continued with my task. When I opened the door, I noticed a large leather jacket facing with its back to me. I figured it was my mum's and it was hanging in a weird direction, but she didn't own anything like that, and I probably would have noticed her wearing it if it was new. Presuming it was hers, I threw my shoes in with it and closed the door. About an hour later, when my mum's out of the bath and probably in her bedroom settling down, I was watching TV in the lounge room when I hear sirens blaring from outside. I promptly turned the TV off and headed towards the front door that opened into the lounge. Opening the door to inspect the commotion, I noticed that the 2 police cars had stopped just over the street from me. 3 cops ran towards me immediately after leaving their cars and shoved me aside armed with pistols. They inspected the area thoroughly, which woke my mum, who was keen to inspect the commotion.
What the
She was cut off by an officer shouting,
Over here, get down.
The other cops sprinted towards the other, and they were followed sheepishly by myself and my mother to see a 30-something-year-old man in that same jacket I saw being escorted out of the heating cupboard and disarmed of a kitchen knife. They took him away and took our statement of what we had seen. It turns out the guy was mentally unstable and lived only a couple of streets away from us, and he had come in through an open window and hidden in the broom cupboard with the intention of hurting another man called Blake Thomas, who we never found out about, but my mum and I had never heard of him. I told my mum that I had seen the jacket earlier, but no one else has ever heard this story. It was certainly frightening for me. What if I had inspected the jacket when I first opened the cupboard? What if he'd come out and seen me in the lounge? I don't know, but I'm certainly glad I never had to see the guy up close. Number 17. It was a summer night in 2010 in the UK. It was around 8 PM. I was out playing on a patch of grass with some friends. We were playing football. All was well until my friend Leo kicked the ball a little too hard and went over the gate, which led to some concrete stairs and the woods, as we called it. It was a woodland area with lots of trees, so you could barely see inside. We all headed toward the gate. The ball was nowhere in sight, which was weird as the ball shouldn't have gone too far. So we decided to hop over the gate and go and look for the ball. I know now that I should have listened to my gut, as it was telling me to just forget the ball and go home. But I ignored it and followed my friends. We made our way down the concrete stairs. We decided to split up and look for the ball in the woods. A few minutes pass, then I hear grass crunching in a strange way, like someone was limping. I called out,
Leo, Jake, Charlotte, is that you?
I hear my friend scream out,
Gabby, where are you? There's a weird guy in there. Get out of there.
I suddenly panic, realizing the voices were coming from another direction to where the grass was crunching, so I crawl up near a tree and cling onto the branches. I see a man who looked around 30, wearing a black hoodie and black leather gloves. His walk was strange. The only word to describe it was like how a penguin walked, wobbling, almost limping side to side. In one hand he held Jake's football, in the other, a knife. I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest. I have never been so afraid. What was he doing here, with a knife? Then I heard the man speak.
I know you're here somewhere, girl. I saw you looking for this.
He holds the ball in front of him, then he raises the knife and plunges it into the ball. He slowly looks up, right at me, and on his face lies a devilish smile. I scream as loud as possible. He throws the ball right at me, which knocks me off balance, so my legs are dangling and I'm holding onto the branch with my hands. I try to pull back up, but then he swings the knife, which slices against my foot. I was wearing slip-on shoes, so the knife sliced against my skin. I shriek in pain and let go of the branch and fall to the ground. I thought right there and then I was done for. The man, holding the knife between his teeth with my blood on it, got on top of me and pulled out some tape out of his pocket and wrapped my wrists together. He then covered my mouth with some type of gag. The next thing I know, everything was black. He had put something over my head. I had never been so scared in my life. I was trying to scream, but nothing was coming out. I heard what sounded like Jake's brother yelling. I heard a scuffle, and then someone picked me up. Not knowing who it was, I was trying to break free. When the bag over my head was lifted, I saw Luke, Jake's brother, looking down at me. I was so happy. I looked behind and saw the man giving one last look before he disappeared back into the woods. Unfortunately, he was never caught. I only think I ever saw him once more. I'm sure I saw him hiding behind a bush in the garden opposite my house once. It freaked me out, so I told my parents. My mum and I and my dad ended up moving houses the following week. I still have the scar on my foot to this day, which always reminds me of the terror that happened on that day. To this day, I'm so grateful to Luke. If it wasn't for him, I hate to think of what the man in the hood could have done to me. Number 16. It was a very nice evening when we arrived at my grandfather's camp deep in the backwoods, about 30 miles from any civilization, near a very beautiful river and the view of the large mountains. Our family usually went there when summer arrived. The only way to get onto the camp road is to drive a long winding road and then through a large yellow gate. We rolled up on the gate slowly so I could get out to unlock it. I approached the gate to find that the lock wasn't even locked. It was lying on top of the gate. This was very strange. We never leave the gates unlocked. Anyway, We shrugged it off because my father is always forgetful and must have forgot to lock it when he left the summer before. We drove up to the camp to inspect it to find that there were obvious footprints all over the place, like someone was walking around the entire camp. My father and his friend said that the camp had been broken into, so he pushed the 4 of us kids aside, and with his friend, he grabbed the shotgun and pistol we brought along the way in case of bears or something. They approached the door and found it was locked. They went around the entire camp and found nothing broken or stolen. We thought that someone was just strolling around and just looking, hopefully. However, it was a wealthy looking cabin because it was worth around $300,000. After the adults felt it was safe, we all headed down to our luggage by the river where we had left it by the canoes. We strolled down there in the beating hot sun. Luckily, there was a bit of a cool breeze that felt like heaven with the heat. We grabbed all of our gear and headed to the agonizing hike up the hill to our cabins. With all that gear that weighed about 500 pounds, I nearly fainted because the hill is probably a good 25-degree angle. After we got up there to the main cabin, the adults and kids split up and the kids went to the kids' cabin and the adults to the main lodge. My sister, Carrie, and Megan and I started to head towards the cabin and we felt like we were going to collapse of heat exhaustion, and these bags don't help. Finally, we got to the door and unlocked it. We couldn't wait to just flop on our beds and simply relax, and we did just so, and it felt so nice to relieve our muscles. We laid there for a while until we heard our mum yell,
"Supper's ready."
It was already dark when we went outside, and it was very eerie and creepy. When we went out the door, I was the last one out, so I had to shut it. My sisters were already a good 15 feet in front of me, and when I had looked away from the door to walk towards the lodge, I caught a glimpse of movement in the woods. It looked to be human. Being the typical 16-year-old boy, I tried not to look scared in front of my sisters, but I was truly frightened. When we got to the main lodge, I told my dad about it, but he said it was most likely a deer or something, because they are very common to see around my camp. But I was dead sure it was human, whatever I saw, or whoever I saw. Later on in the night, around 9:30 or 10 p.m, when we were walking back to the kids' cabin to go to sleep, I saw a figure behind a tree in all black. I pointed it out to my older sister and they looked and saw nothing. Either I was seeing things or I have really good vision. They also said to me that it must have been a deer, but I knew it wasn't. When we were getting into bed, I took out the little .22 we have under my bed and loaded it and put it in arm's reach, so if anything happened, I was ready. Luckily, that little gun probably saved our lives that night. I nearly stayed up all night, almost dozing off, but I heard something right beside the cabin, just walking outside. I sprung up and woke up my sisters, and I grabbed the little gun and cocked it back. I waited and waited. After a good 10 minutes of not hearing anything anymore, there it was again. We heard a creak of someone stepping on the porch outside the front door. We were literally shitting ourselves at this point. The only problem was, we didn't lock the door. So whoever was out there could get in, no problem. I saw the little door handle move inch by inch, and the door squeaked open, and I saw a dark figure in the doorway, the moonlight shining behind him just to make the moment more terrifying for us. I was too scared to even point the gun at him. The person stepped inside without knowing that we were looking straight at him because the lights were off. Little did he know I was armed and not about to let my sisters be hurt by this guy. I said in the most manly voice I could muster, "Who the fuck are you?" As I said that, my sister turned on the light to reveal this guy had a mask, all black clothes, a hoodie on, and a backpack that looked like it was half full. I pointed the gun straight at the fucker, and when I did that, I yelled at the top of my lungs, "Help! There's someone here!" The adults were awake and came running this way, but before they could get to the door, the guy had bolted into the woods. For some reason, my dad said he's going to kill that son of a bitch and started firing into the woods. I felt a little more safe now that my dad and his friends were there, and the 7 of us, all with guns, started to go around the camp armed with 45s and shotguns. I literally did not even know what to do. My dad just said, "Look around the camp." We went in pairs, walking around the camp, firing random shots in the woods. I was so scared I thought one of the trees was him. Let's just say the tree was no longer upright by the time I was finished with it. I was shaking in my boots. I thought I shot the guy, so I went over, I wiped the sweat off my forehead, and in a sigh of relief I said, "Oh fuck, thank God it's not him." After a while of roaming around the camp, we all gathered in the main lodge and had at least 2 people to stand watch in case that creep came back. After that incident, we called the police as soon as we got back into town. They told us that they would do everything they could, but I knew for a fact they were never going to catch the guy. If that fucker ever comes back again, we'll be ready. Even though I'm scared shitless of the potential killer, I'll protect my family. And if he ever comes back, he won't be walking out of the woods for sure this time. For the people who are asking, why didn't you shoot him when you saw him in your cabin? To be truthful, I was actually really terrified. I just couldn't bring myself to do it.
Number 15.
My parents had gone to Brazil, our home country, for about a month. I was staying with my older brother, who was about 25 at the time. I've always had trouble sleeping, seeing as I slept in my parents' room until I turned 10. This was in the middle of the school year, and I would stay up night after night watching late-night television, such as Nick at Night. My parents' room is in the corner of the house, and the living room is right next to it, just a door with a lock right next to it. I was having an extremely tough time getting to sleep that night, so I turned to go into the living room. It was about 11 or 12 at night. My brother had fallen asleep on the couch, so I turned on the television and sat on the floor against the couch, facing the television. Around some point, I ended up dozing off, only to be awakened by something I'll never be able to explain. Like most kitchens, we have a counter that peers off into the living room, and opposite is the kitchen. I heard the sink turn on, followed by what I can only explain as some type of demonic laughter. I woke up my brother, and he immediately scolded me, telling me I forgot to lock the doors or something. I swore I did. I know I did. I slept with the lights on all that night. I never made a sound. Occasionally, my brother would wake up and turn them off, but I would always turn them back on. I have been afraid of the dark ever since this experience.
Number 14.
Okay, so I live in Barnsley in England, and I'm a male and was 18 at the time. I insured my car for a day or two to chauffeur some of my friends to a wedding. I left the party of the wedding early to go pick up my girlfriend at the time, and her best friend, just to do general stuff like drive around and have a bit of fun. On the outskirts of the shopping centre in town, there is a multi-storey building complex that is still in the process of being built. The entire frame was built, however, it was not uncommon for a few others to sneak around inside. After driving around for an hour, the 3 of us decided to go ahead and explore it ourselves. There was only one way in and one way out, consisting of sliding under a gate big enough to get under. All 3 of us slid under and put the flashlight on with our phones. It was pitch black by this point, and the building wasn't lit whatsoever, except for the cabins for the workers. There were a lot of steps to go up, and the building consisted of around 13 floors. We started on the ground floor and went straight to the stairs. You can go down to the basement or up. The basement was completely black. No light could get in whatsoever, so we avoided it completely and started going up the floors. Everything was okay until we got to around the 9th floor, where we left the stairs to go to the edge of the building and look down and take a few photos of the surroundings. After 5 minutes, we decided to venture the rest of the way to the top. We re-enter the staircase and hear something drop like a spoon dropping on concrete. The noise came from above, so we were a little creeped out but decided to continue. I grab a large metal pole in the stairwell, just in case. The pole was so large I kept hitting it on the roof of the stairwell, making dings all the way up the floors. As we get onto the next floor, the 10th floor, we start to see some weird stuff, like empty packets of chocolate and food in general. Not so bad, right? So we go up another floor, where we get a lot more concerned, as there was blood splattered all over the concrete wall, and drops of blood on the floor, as well as needles, and another pole like the one I had with blood on the end. We all looked at each other, really freaked out, but decided to continue on. There's only 2 floors left by this point, and the next floor was the same as the last, consisting of blood and needles. My girlfriend had the flashlight and got to the top of the next floor, the last floor, and stops dead still and doesn't move an inch. The light was pointing at something. I couldn't see what it was, but she was frozen in place and couldn't move at all. After 30 seconds of her staring at whatever it was, I hear a shuffle from above, and my girlfriend turned and faced me. She was pale white. Her eyes were huge and she looked terrified. I've never seen that look on someone's face before. It scared me just looking at her. Then she whispered to me,
"Run."
I hear the shuffling and hear something running down the stairs. Fair to say, we bolted down the stairs as fast as possible. I dropped the pole because it was too difficult to run with. We ran and ran until we got all the way down, but we went too far and ended up in the pitch black basement and couldn't see a thing. My girlfriend and the girl who was with us stood dead in the darkness. We could still hear what was following us. It was still running down the stairs. We quickly turned and bolted back up one set of stairs to get back to the ground floor. We ran out of the building quickly, sliding under the gate and racing to my car, which was parked next to the building in a car park. We all get into the car and quickly drive away. As I look into my rearview mirror, I see a man sliding under the gate. I see him stand there with a large knife in his hand and a creepy smile on his face. I've never been so terrified in my life. We go back to my girlfriend's and have a drink of beer just to relax. A few weeks later, I insured my car again to go to another wedding. Again, I came home early and decided to pick up my girlfriend and her best friend, and after a few hours decided to go back to the same building. We return and look through the gate and see a car parked inside the building. There was a man in a high-vis, asleep in the car, but the car was unlocked. All I could wonder was, is the man with the knife still up there? Does the man in the car know how much danger he's in, sleeping in his car in there, especially with it unlocked? I'll never venture in there again, and my girlfriend and I at the time have since broken up. I've since insured the car fully, and the construction of that building has still continued. I told a few of my friends this story, and they told me later on that there was a crazy drug addict that lived up there, but I haven't heard anything since.
Number 13.
I was home alone one evening last year while my mum and stepdad were at work. I was 14 at the time, and it was around 7:30 and really dark because it was the winter months, and of course, the days got darker earlier. Anyway, I was up in my room studying for a test I had in school the next day when I heard the doorbell ringing. My mother was cautious of me answering the door to strangers, especially at night, so I ignored it. Then it rang again, but this time multiple times in a row. I was really freaked out, and I couldn't look out of my window or any other of the windows upstairs, as a matter of fact, because from my window, the front door was covered by the porch, and the other windows were at the side of the house, and the other two, the bathroom and the second bedroom window, were facing the back of the house. I was afraid that if I went downstairs, they would know someone was in, and I never took that chance, so I stayed upstairs, in my bed. A few minutes later, I heard the door banging loudly. Whoever this was, I had no idea what they wanted or why they were at my house. I just wished they would go away, and I thought they may have because the banging and the ringing of the doorbell stopped. Then I heard a shuffling noise and some footsteps coming from outside my house. It sounded like the person was in my front garden. Then the doorbell rang again, but this time it continued non-stop. The pressing of the doorbell button got faster and faster. This person was obviously off their head, and they kept at it for at least 5 minutes, so I called the police. The person on the other end asked me my name, my age, address, and my parents' name. Then they told me 2 police officers would be at my house within 15 minutes, as the police station was a couple of miles away. The banging on the door continued. I told the woman on the other end that I was really scared, and she told me she'd stay on the line until the police came. About roughly 10 minutes later, I heard a normal knock at my door, and the woman said that the police were at my door. She said goodbye and hung up. I rushed downstairs and opened the door to one of the policemen. He told me they found a drunk man lying against my door with a bottle of vodka and some condoms. While the two policemen dragged the man in handcuffs into the back of their car, one of the officers said, "Your name's Andre, am I right?" I said yes. Then he said, "That very man who was trying to break into your house, he's an infamous pedophile and has been on the run for years." This made a chill go down my spine. If I hadn't have locked that door, I would have probably been in serious danger. "He's going down for a long time, son. Don't you worry," the policeman said. Weakly, I said thank you to the officers for coming so quickly and handling the man, and they walked off into the car and drove away. And that was the most scariest experience I've ever had. Number 12. I live in a neighbourhood that has a park and some woods with a creek. When I was around 13 years old, my friend and I went down to the park for the day just to play around and such. My friend and I were throwing some sticks down into the creek, having a little competition to see who could throw them the farthest, when suddenly we hear a clicking noise not too far behind us. It happened once or twice after that, before I eventually turned around to see some man in his 50s or 60s, with a camera, snapping pictures of us. Once he noticed we spotted him, he began to yell at us to get off of his property and that he would come down there if we didn't comply. Now, we weren't on his property to begin with, and we weren't actually that close to where his fence ended and the park began, so we just kind of brushed it off. When we began resuming our little game, we heard him yell once more, this time much louder. It was more of a scream, and I couldn't really make out any words. When I turned around, I noticed he had something in his hand, an axe and a bucket. It was a little weird to us. Then what he said next freaked us all out.
"If you don't leave, I'm going to chop off your heads and put them in this bucket."
He then thrashed the bucket in the air, glaring at us. We stood there in shock, glancing at one another before he began to walk down to the base of his fence where the gate leading to the park was. We bolted off into the woods to hide, screaming after our friends. We ran for a good minute before my friend pulled me down into some shrubs. He snapped out his phone to call his parents as we hid. We didn't hear anything until a few seconds after his mum said she was coming down to the park and calling the police. We began to hear footsteps approaching us, and the clanks of an axe against the bucket.
"Where are you?"
he chimed in a sinister tone as his steps grew louder. I was prepared to bolt out of the shrubs as his steps stopped. He poked around the bushes a moment before going back further into the woods, grumbling in annoyance. After his steps faded, we began to bolt out running. We heard him yell once more, chasing after us. Now, he was older, so we could easily lose him, and once we got out of the woods, we ran to the rest of our friends who were confused at all the commotion. A few moments later, we saw a car pull up to the parking lot of the park and just sit there. We could tell it was the man. He continued to take pictures of the rest of us until my friend's mother arrived. The car sped away, and to this day, I haven't seen him back around the neighborhood since. It's been about 4 years since that time. Number 11. This is from a female's perspective. It was 2007 at the time, and we were pretty poor and lived in a small apartment where my mum and brother and I lived. My mother would work her ass off just to feed us. She wouldn't come home until 1 a.m. in the morning or later, so I had to kind of become really responsible as a 7-year-old and take care of my brother and other things in our apartment. So the story begins here. It was on a Friday, and my mum told us that if we went to work with her, she would buy us a Happy Meal and convinced us to go. My mother at the time worked in an office, so we didn't really do anything besides just sit around until my mum got off work. So we finally left her office, and her car was running low on gas, so we stopped by a gas station where she came across some guy she knew for years, but never had a full conversation with. Let's call him Tom. They exchanged numbers and we headed back home. The next few weeks, my mum seemed really happy, not depressed or exhausted. I was happy for her since I didn't see her like this in a long time. My mum gave us the news that Tom and her were dating. We were happy for her and she told us that we were moving in with him. I didn't think much of it since we had a pretty decent house with a huge lake behind it, so I was really excited. Once we moved in, the first 3 months were fun. We could do a lot of things we didn't do before, like riding a four-wheeler, hiking mountains, riding a boat in the ocean. I didn't think we would ever have a problem with him, ever. But boy was I wrong. He would usually come home right after work, but things started to get weird, like he came home drunk or fucked up by some drugs, then would blame us for hiding things from him or accuse my mum of cheating while he was at work. I forgot to mention Tom told my mum to quit her full-time job, and my mum said she was planning to get a part-time job to at least have some money for herself and us, but Tom refused. He didn't want my mum to go to work or leave the house without his permission. That was when Tom got his creepy obsession with my mum. She couldn't talk to anyone he didn't like, not even her best friend. She could only talk to friends that Tom approved of. Months went by and we decided it was best for us to leave for our safety and hers. My brother and I were upstairs watching TV in my room while my mum went to go talk with Tom about us leaving. A few minutes went by and then we heard Tom yelling and cursing. We heard glass break. And that's when my brother and I just looked at each other in fear, hoping everything was fine. We ran downstairs and what I saw made me want to punch his fucking face repeatedly until I saw his brains. My mum's head was bleeding, and he had his hands around her neck. I ran to get my mum's cell phone, yelling at him that I was calling the police. He backed off and walked to the backyard, probably to get one of his weapons. My mum grabbed us by the hand, and we ran out of there. As we were driving to one of my mum's friend's house, I couldn't believe what happened. I was in shock because he seemed to be so outgoing, but then he showed his cruel and evil side. We got to my mother's friend's house and stayed there for a few weeks. Tom called my mum constantly, over and over again, every day, leaving so many messages. He would send pictures of her belongings being burnt or texting our location, which scared the living shit out of me. 2 years went by, he stopped bothering us. We got our life back together and everything was back to how it was for a while. We then started getting voicemails of someone breathing heavily or silent talking to the point you had to put it to your ear just to hear it. I knew it was Tom, but we ignored it. One day, my mum invited one of her good friends and her children. Let's name her Lauren. My mum and Lauren were having a normal conversation, just going off about pointless things. We told Lauren's children that our apartment had a pool and they wanted to go, and my brother also wanted to go too. So my mum asked kindly if Lauren would take us, and she said yes, so we went to the pool and had some fun, but I had this feeling we needed to go back as soon as we could. Lauren also seemed uneasy, so I wasn't the only one knowing something felt weird. We walked back and saw the door open. We finally looked inside and saw that everything was scattered around. The kitchen table was knocked down, there were holes in the wall. Everything in the kitchen was on the floor. We called out for my mum. She came out of the restroom crying, saying Tom had bursted in while she was cooking and attacked her. She escaped and quickly ran into the restroom and locked it and called the police. She finally got a restraining order on him after this. How could he have known my mum was there alone? Could he have been watching us all along? I don't know, but it was creepy as shit. So, I finally started 5th grade, and I was going to this new school. I sucked at making new friends, so I would always wake up feeling like shit for not being one of the popular kids back then. This one morning felt like an average morning. I still woke up feeling like a piece of crap and hating school. I got in my mum's car. It was pretty dark, and I was still half asleep. My mum turned on the car, and then I looked at my mum, and her jaw dropped. Her eyes got 1,000 times bigger. She started breathing heavily. She was looking in her rearview mirror. I looked at it too, and there he was, in the back seat, telling my mum to drive. My mum told him to get the fuck out of her car. You could hear the anger in her voice, but he wouldn't get off. It was like my mum was talking to a brick wall. He was obviously drunk. He wouldn't get out and threatened us if my mum wouldn't start driving. My mum dropped me off at school with Tom still in the car, and I wanted to stay with her, but she said she couldn't handle it. I couldn't even focus on what the fuck the teacher was saying. I was just so worried about my mum, wondering if she was still alive and well. So, my mum finally picked me up, and my brother. She didn't say a word. She would usually say things like, "How did school go?" Or, "What did you want to eat?" Or sometimes even, "Did you finally get a friend?" But today, it was nothing. Just silence. She didn't bring anything up about what happened in the morning, and I'd ask her, but she would either get mad or change the subject if I brought it up. And to this day, she still hasn't told me what had happened. She kept saying it was nothing and that it doesn't matter anymore. So I kinda got over it, but I'm still curious on what happened that day. He got arrested later for some stupid shit he did, and we didn't get bothered by him for quite a while. He got released in 2013, but didn't bother us. I'm 16 now, and we recently saw Tom at this local store here, where I'm from. He looked really different from the last time I saw him. He went bald, and his face looked lifeless without any emotion. He just kept staring at us and grinning at my mum, which gave me shivers. Tom, you creepy motherfucker. Whoever you decide to torture next, I hope they manhandle your ass.
Number 10.
This actually happened to a friend of mine, who called me right after it happened, scared out of her mind. Let's call her Rachel for this story. Rachel was at a family friend's house, babysitting the kids while the parents, Mr. and Mrs. Williams, were out at a work-related party. She was in the backyard with the kids, kicking a soccer ball around and having some fun before the sun went down. An important detail I should mention is that this house is one of those houses where the walls were made of glass, so if you were looking through the front of the house, you could see into the backyard. It wasn't too late in the evening, around 7:30, when a knock at the door caught Rachel's attention. When she looked from the backyard towards the front door, she saw a bald man with a grey beard and janitor's clothes standing on the porch about 2 feet away from the door. With him, he had a bucket and some rags. She ushered the kids inside and told them to sit on the couch and not to move until she said so. The front door of the house had a screen and a door, so Rachel opened the door but kept the screen firmly closed and talked to the man.
Hello? Hello, I'm here to wash the windows. Mr. Williams hired me. If you could just go get some water, that would be great,
the man said. At first, my friend was skeptical but was somewhat convinced because the man had said the last name of the family.
Okay. Mr. Williams has guests right now and is busy, but I'll ask him about it,
Rachel said. I was surprised at what a clever response this was, not letting the man know she was alone with the kids. She later told me that when she was training to get her babysitting license, one of the first lessons they taught her was to never let strangers know that the adults were gone. Thank God they taught her that. She closed the door and pretended to go ask Mr. Williams about the window washer, bringing the kids along with her into the back room, telling them to stay put until she came for them. When she came back towards the door, the man was still there, only he was closer than before, his nose almost touching the screen. She cracked the door open and said,
Sorry, but Mr. Williams is busy right now. I don't think now is a good time. Oh, it won't take but just a few minutes. If you could just get me some water,
he replied.
I'm sorry, sir. I can't do that. That's fine. I can wait.
He grinned. She said she had never seen someone grin like that before. She closed and locked the door and ran to the back of the house to check on the kids. They stayed back there a while because she didn't want to see the man again and hoped he would eventually just leave. When 30 minutes passed, she peeked into the living room, seeing that the man was still there. He wasn't at the door, but at the window, peering in. He wasn't looking around the house. He was just staring blankly into the room. Rachel locked herself and the kids back in the room and quickly dialed the owner of the house. When she was explaining everything, the owner told her to stay put and that he would call the police. About 10 minutes later, she heard the police arrive, and when she heard Mr. Williams' voice, she knew it was safe to come out. The next part of the story is a little fuzzy. She said it was kind of a blur. She was bombarded with questions from the police and the owners of the house. Rachel told me that after she answered their questions, the police did a full sweep of the neighborhood but found no one who matched her description. What she found out later was what really shook her up. The police told her that this man had been reported doing the same thing to other houses, knocking on doors when it seemed only a woman was home, asking to wash the windows. He would then attack the woman and proceed to ransack the house. A few of the women claimed that he actually sexually assaulted them as well. The police told her that if she had told him that no one else was home, he probably would have done the same to her. Needless to say, my friend doesn't really babysit anymore. Number 9. I live in the great state of Ohio, the southernmost part. I moved into my apartment with my boyfriend of now 8 years in February of 2012, when my youngest daughter was only a month old and my oldest was 2. They're now 3 and 5. We would have a few friends over on weekends, and above our kitchen is our daughter's room. We always hung out playing cards in the kitchen. Every time we played, we would hear long scratches above our heads and footsteps. Our friends felt uncomfortable going upstairs to use the restroom because they would have to pass my kids' room, and everyone always felt like they were being watched and felt uncomfortable going past their room. A few times, I would hear my 2-year-old having conversations with someone. I just thought she was using her imagination at the time. I wasn't too bothered by it because I've had some pretty amazing paranormal things happen to me in the past. If our friends stayed overnight, we would often give them an air mattress and they would stay in our kids' room. The next morning, they would tell us that they would hear footsteps running past their heads in the middle of the night and the feeling of being watched or that they were not alone. I finally asked my oldest, who was 3 at the time, who she talks to. She told me,
"The big black man in my room."
She told me he was nice to her. Nothing bad ever happened to her, and although that freaked me out, I didn't ask her again about it. We didn't hear anything for a while after that, and my daughter didn't talk about the man or even talk to him. Fast forward to when she's 5, and I just got the girls out of the bath. Their dad was due home soon from work. I heard someone whisper and then yell from the bottom of the steps,
"Bree, Bree."
It was Gordon, their dad, I thought, and he was just trying to spook them. Bree looked at me and said,
"Who said my name?"
Jokingly, I said,
"Maybe it's the ghost."
I was brushing their teeth and combing their hair, still in the bathroom, and about 2 minutes later, we heard it again.
"Bree, Bree."
It was said in a way to get her to come to them. We finished up and walked downstairs. I was expecting their dad to jump out, but he never did. I looked around the house. He wasn't anywhere. I went out the back door to look out in the parking lot to make sure his car wasn't there, and it wasn't. I, totally freaked out, grabbed the kids and we sat at the back door. I texted him. He was at his friend's house and was about to leave. I told him to get home now. I made sure all the doors and the windows were locked, like I always have them, and they were. We waited on our back patio until he arrived home. I was okay with whatever was here until it said my daughter's name, in her dad's voice, in a way to make her come to it. Also, about a few months back, I was lying downstairs asleep. My youngest and her dad were asleep upstairs, and my oldest was at her grandmother's for the night. I was having a weird dream. I don't remember the whole thing, but I remember waking myself up. I laid there for a few moments, about to go upstairs to bed, when I heard in a very childlike voice,
"But I don't want to."
I laid there, thinking a toy went off, when I remembered that evening we had cleaned up all the toys and put them in the kids' room. I froze and yelled several times, and then I chanced it and ran upstairs near where the voice came from. I got to my room and asked my boyfriend if he heard me basically screaming for him. He said he was laying there, awake, and didn't hear a thing. The only reason why I was scared was because the way this child voice said, "but I don't want to," freaked me out. I felt like I was in danger, like something else was telling this thing to harm me, and it was saying it didn't want to. Nothing has happened since these incidents besides the footsteps and the shadows here and there, and of course, I always feel like I'm being watched. I know we're not alone here. Number 8. I live in Vietnam, a place where it's not uncommon to hear of kidnappings or assaults and whatnot, and it's even more uncommon to hear of any action being done for it. Contrary to belief, these sorts of things often happen in broad daylight, in public places, and it is on public transportation where I found myself in one of the most unnerving situations of my life. My housekeeper offered to take my older cousin George and I to see the Su Chi tunnels, a now historical site which used to house the Vietnamese populations underground in narrow tunnels during the Vietnam War. We took a bus as it was cheaper and we don't own a car. Su Chi was only around an hour to 2 hours away. For 2/3 of the journey, I was asleep by the window, my cousin and my keeper on the 2 seats by the aisle. I'm very irritable when I'm woken up, so when my housekeeper was shaking me furiously, whispering for me to get up and go to the front seats, I grumpily refused, telling her to go up ahead and let me sleep. It was because of my tiredness. I hadn't stopped to wonder why my keeper was whispering and why she was so adamant about moving up. After about 5 minutes of fighting, my keeper gave up and headed up with my cousin while I attempted to get comfortable again. Not 10 minutes later, I was woken up yet again, this time by my cousin George. He told me to get up as we were getting off now. I trudged off the bus, and as it left, I found myself rather confused by my surroundings. When I questioned my keeper about it, she shook her head and grabbed me quite suddenly by my shoulders. "We had to get off," she told me. A look I now recognized as fear on her face. On the other row of seats, on our aisle, a man in a cloak was sitting there. When I looked over to see what was glinting in the sunlight, I saw that he was holding a knife in his hand. That's why I was moving us up, but you stubbornly refused to move. Already my face was flushed with embarrassment and my skin was crawling with fear. "Worse to come," she continued. "The reason we got off on this stop was because even from the front, I could see the man staring at you, running the blade across his palms." At this point, my skin had completely broken out in goosebumps. I quickly explained everything to my cousin, who couldn't speak or understand Vietnamese, and he was just as equally horrified. Thankfully, she had informed the driver before she got off, and all he did was shake his head and say, "This is not the first time this has happened. I'll call my friends to wait at the next stop, and we'll do something about him. You should keep your daughter close. Lots of crazy men like half-Western girls like her. They like to..." She promptly stopped. When I passed her for more information, she merely ignored me. We got on another bus and continued the rest of the journey with no more incidents. For the whole day though, I couldn't stop my mind from drifting back to my keeper's frantic whisper, and as such, as I tried, I couldn't remember the face of the figure sitting not 3 seats away from me. The fact that I had been so oblivious to it all only made the situation that much more harrowing. I still take the bus every once in a while, but after that, I've become a little more wary. I try to sit next to other people and keep an eye out for anything shiny. Number 7. All of these happenings took place over the span of 8 years, and I still believe to this day that whatever it was following me. It all started when I was 6 years old. I guess that would have been in Lloydminster, Canada, in the year 1997. My best friend and her brother's family decided to move about 2 blocks away from my house. We'll call them Anna and Nate. We were excited and planned to have many sleepovers. I remember the first time that I stepped into that house. It was quite old. The basement was completely finished, and it had a very strange feeling to it the moment I walked into it. For some strange reason, we always feared the basement. It didn't matter if it was day or night, it just was pitch black and smelt weird. Anyways, I can honestly say that nothing of note really happened for the first few months. Everything seemed to be perfectly normal, until we started having sleepovers. The first occurrence was one of the creepiest moments of my life. I'll never forget it to this day. Anna and Nate shared a room. Nate slept on the bottom bunk and Anna on the top, so whenever we had sleepovers, I would share the top bunk with Anna. That night, I was frantically shaken awake by Anna, who was whimpering and staring directly towards the foot of her bed. I rubbed my eyes and followed her gaze, only to tightly grip her arm and to let out a small yelp. There, at the foot of the bed, was the dark figure of a man. The faint light that trickled through the window was just enough to see that there was no facial feature whatsoever on his face. It was just black. He must have been tall because we were on the top bunk and we could see this figure from the waist up, just standing there. We couldn't even tell if he was staring, which made it all the more unsettling. With a huge cry, I grabbed my pillow and threw it at him with all my might. It passed straight through him, and almost instantly, he went through the floor, seemingly back to the basement. Anna and I just sat there holding each other in terror. We couldn't sleep, but we must have drifted off somehow through the night because the next thing we knew, it was morning. We tried to tell our parents that morning what had happened, and of course they never believed us and told us repeatedly that it just must have been our imagination. But Anna and I knew that we both couldn't have seen it unless it truly happened, and my pillow was still on the floor against the wall. Nate didn't really trust what we had seen either and liked to tease us that we were scaredy cats, but little did he know that there was way more to come. A couple of months later, I was over for a sleepover again. We were all playing in their room, and Nate got tired, so he laid on his bed and started drawing triangles on the wall in intricate patterns. Anna and I thought nothing of it, but suddenly he leapt up and started tearing the room apart, throwing our toys and flipping everything in sight. We kept begging him to stop, but while he was conscious, he told us that he couldn't. He started crying hysterically, and their parents came barreling in because of all the commotion. Nate dropped to the floor unconscious, and again they dismissed our distressed explanations of what had happened. But after that, Nate was on our side. After that occurrence, Anna started sleepwalking regularly. I remember her parents telling mine that it was the creepiest experience because she would sleepwalk with her eyes wide open and rolled back in her head. Her parents started to worry about her health as she was fainting regularly. Again and again, more and more strange things happened. We would be awakened by lights moving on the ceiling at night while we slept. Drumming, accompanied with muffling laughter, through the night was a common occurrence, and by this time it was also happening to their older sister whose bedroom was in the basement. Anna and Nate's dad also became unnerved one night when he was walking back to his bedroom from the bathroom and swore he saw an alien-like figure standing in the hallway. He yelled at it thinking it was an intruder, but like before, it disappeared through the floor. Eventually, after several years had gone by, they decided to do renovations on the house downstairs. I remember my parents whispering about it for years. Construction workers had torn down some of the walls in the basement, and what they found had the cops called to the scene. There were Ouija boards, tarot cards, and other items from witchcraft hidden in the walls, as well as other things that our parents wouldn't tell us. But I can only imagine. Anna and Nate's parents moved away from the house soon afterwards. The sleepwalking and the fits stopped immediately. The horror ended for them as soon as they moved, but for some strange reason, whatever entities were in that house decided to follow me. Maybe because I dwelt on it so much, I don't know. But my family decided to move to a different city, and there, till I was about 14 years old, I had something terrorizing me. Not every night, but some nights, I would be awakened by something holding me down by the throat, breathing in my ear. Every so often it would whisper, "Did you forget me?" Eventually, my parents saw the bruises on my neck and saw that I was becoming severely depressed, to the point where I was self-harming and attempting suicide. They got me help. Eventually things stopped for me, but to this day I worry about it starting again. I try to forget about it, but for me, whenever something went bump in the night, it was to be feared. It's now been almost 10 years since the last occurrence, and I've moved very far away from that possessed house. The house on 49th Street.
Number 6.
This happened to me last year when I was 16. I'd just got my first job working at the McDonald's up the street. Not the best job, but I made $9 an hour, which was plenty for the amount of hours I worked. Anyways, after about a month of me working there, I started being placed on the night shift since it was the summertime. Now, usually we weren't very busy at night, but there would always be this one man who would come in at that same time every evening. He always ordered the same thing, just a small fries. He never was a problem for about a week, and then one day he started acting weird. He would always stare at me for a minute before getting his fries, and then when he got them, he would sit and just stare at me. This made me really uneasy. He was an older man, about mid-40s, kind of dirty looking, and was missing a majority of his teeth. One day, it was almost time for me to clock out, but this was different. The man never showed up today. I didn't think much of it until about half an hour before I was off work. I went to go get the garbage out, and I was walking across the lot, and I got a sensation of being watched. I didn't pay too much mind to it until I got to the dumpster where I heard a rustling noise from the trees behind it. It freaked me out, so I threw the bag in the dumpster and started heading back inside, but I was stopped by a man. He walked out right in front of me and said, "It sure is nice out here." Trying to be polite, I just simply replied with a yes and tried to move past him, but he stopped me again. He asked me what the rush was. Now, keep in mind this is the most he's ever spoken to me. I told him I was working and should probably get back inside, but he grabbed my arm and said, "You're very beautiful." I said thank you and asked him to let go of my arm, but he refused. He started staring at my body, looking me up and down with a sick smirk on his face. He looked at me again and said, "You have an amazing body. I'd love to see you without all those clothes on." This really scared me, and I told him if he didn't let go, I would yell for the manager. He let go after a moment, and I ran back inside. I never told my co-worker, but I wish I did. The next evening, I didn't have to work. I was at home in my bedroom watching TV when I got a message from a blocked number. It said, "Where were you tonight, beautiful?" I simply thought it was just someone with the wrong number, so I just ignored it at first. But fast forward to about 2 a.m. I was woken up by the buzzing of my phone. The caller ID said it was blocked on it. I stupidly answered the phone, and a man spoke and said, "Why are you avoiding me?" I asked who it was, and he simply said, "You know." This ran chills down my spine because I have no idea how he could have gotten my number. I immediately hung up the phone and went back to sleep. For about a week or so, I never heard from the man, and he didn't come to McDonald's. I was just getting off work one evening at about 12:30 a.m. I only lived 7 blocks away, so I always walked home. After about 5 minutes of me walking, I felt really uneasy. I started speed walking when someone grabbed me from behind and covered my mouth. It was the man, but this time, he had a knife. He told me if I screamed that he would kill me, so I stayed quiet. He pulled me over to a wooded area. I tried to run, but he was holding me so tight. He threw me on the ground and tried to take my shirt off. I fought back as much as I could, kicking and scratching. But that made things worse. He grabbed the knife and put it against my throat and told me if I didn't behave like a good little girl, he was going to hurt me. As he held the knife to my throat, he slid his hand down my pants. This made me freak out, so I made the risky move of getting the knife away. I made him drop it and immediately started running towards the road, screaming for help, and he wasn't far behind me. Thank God there was a man who saw me and pulled his truck over. He saw the man and told me to jump in. I wasn't going to argue with that, so I got in the truck and started to dial my mum. When the man got me home, I thanked him, and my mum called the police. The man was arrested and was charged with sexual harassment, and he was linked to the rape of two 13-year-old girls. He currently is in jail on 25 to life. I hope that sick bastard never gets to touch the world outside of his cell. Number 5. I have never told anyone outside of my family of this story, for fear of thinking I am insane, or lying, or both. But I feel if I told others of this tale, I could be able to comprehend it better. Alright, well, I was in the 3rd grade at a new school I was attending, as I had just moved into this small town. It was an expensive private school, so many of the kids there were what I consider to be very rich and snobby. Not all, but many. There was one kid though, her name was Emma. All I can remember of her appearance was that she was very tall with brown curly hair. She was very quiet and almost never spoke. So being the brave kid I was, I socialized with her. At first I could see the confusion on her face that someone was actually speaking to her. But after a while, she began to open up and I learned how nice she really was. We happily chatted about video games, which we were both very fond of, and anime, which was also a hobby of ours. I remember she was always drawing. Yeah, she would bring a sketchbook to school every day. She was very private about her drawings, but what I could see from them, they were pretty good for how young she was. We eventually grew to be best friends, and she was the only other kid I ever really hung out with. But there was something about her that was off. First, she had a really dark sense of humor. Whenever we would hear of some sort of tragedy or accident, she always had a look of laughter on her face. Being the extremely touchy and emotional kid I was, I always thought that was cruel and disrespectful to those who had endured the incident. And second, which was a bit darker, was that Emma constantly said she had a demon bound to her body. I, of course, never took this seriously, as I thought she was just joking or trying to sound dark and edgy. I remember the demon's name was Akuma, which through a quick Google Translate search I found out Akuma actually means demon in Japanese. Emma said that Akuma was evil and made her do things that she didn't mean or want to do, like some sort of demonic possession. I again wrote this off as Emma trying to sound cool and creepy, and never really gave it much thought. I distinctly remember one conversation we had during lunch. Emma just turned to me with a completely serious expression on her face and said, "Akuma doesn't like you." I gave her a weird look and answered, "Yeah? Well, I don't like her either." Emma just giggled and replied, "Akuma's glad to hear so." During the end of the school year, we decided to have a sleepover, and the setting was my house. This would be the first time Emma would meet my family. She arrived sooner than expected at my home. She introduced herself to my parents, you know, the usual runaround. She impressed my parents by saying she always had a strong fondness for Eastern culture, as my family is a proud family from Korea. So my parents already liked her, which pleased me. We went upstairs to my room and did the usual sleepover stuff. Later into the night, when my parents were already asleep, we got into an argument about who knows what. It was quickly becoming more and more heated, and I could tell she was getting pretty damn pissed. She turned away from me, trying to cool down. She started making some sort of noise, which sounded like a mixture between growling and gurgling. Whatever it was, it didn't sound human. I rolled my eyes and said, "Oh, shut up. There's no demon and you're just trying to freak me out." The room went quiet. Emma perked up. She slowly turned around towards me. The rest is burnt into my memory. Her eyes, her pupils were smaller than I thought humanly possible. I felt a crippling, awful wave of dread wash over me. Emma tackled me to the ground and shoved a pillow to my face, and then everything went black. I woke up the next morning to find myself on my bed and Emma sleeping in the sleeping bag she had brought. I felt strange and lightheaded. Emma seemed somewhat detached and a tad emotionless afterwards. We had breakfast and Emma said her goodbyes and left. I was really shaken about the night before and I told my parents what happened. Knowing how sweet Emma was and how I had just woken up, they told me I just had a bad dream and that nothing was wrong. Not wanting to believe it myself, I just went with it. Until that night, when I was getting undressed to take a shower, I noticed a small red mark on my chest, stomach and back, and a rather large bite mark on my right shoulder blade. I quickly rushed to my mother to show her and said it was Emma's doing. She said it couldn't have been, as the bite mark was clearly not human. The bite mark didn't break my skin though, so there was not much that we could do. The rest of the school year I was cautious around Emma, but she seemed even more detached and dazed than before. When the next year rolled around, Emma did not attend our school anymore. I felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. I felt lonely as Emma was the best friend I've ever had. I still try to convince myself it was a dream, but there's no point lying to myself. It was real, and now when I think back on when Emma said there was a demon bound to her soul, I just can't help but believe her.
Number 4.
To give some background, I live in Australia, and this happened when I was 16. I had been on my way into my job at the local mall where I worked as a cashier. It was close to midday, and I just pulled into the supermarket on my push bike and was walking up to the entrance when this random guy in his late 20s walked up to me and asked if I was interested in modelling and that he was working at the mall for a fashion show that was on that day. To describe me, I was about 6'1" then. I was muscular, but still had a bit of a belly, so I was thrown off being requested as a model. I knew the mall was having a show that day and declined him. He said, "Oh well, that's too bad. You're just what I was looking for. Give me your name and email and I'll contact you about some future work." My name is James. At the time, not thinking about it, I gave him my actual email address. "Okay, well, I'll get in touch," he said, and smiled at me creepily and walked off. Fast forward till the end of my shift. It's 8:30 at night and my boss let me go early as it was threatening to rain and she knew I had to ride my bike home. I went and clocked out and bought a Coke, and then I walked through the front and unlocked my bike. I noticed an odd black cord on the ground next to my bike. Odd, I thought, and mounted up and started to ride off to go down the hill to cut through the underpass to take my shortcut home. As I coasted down the hill, suddenly a bottle shattered in front of me, and I tried to slam the brakes only to find I wasn't slowing down and was headed for a rock concrete wall. I looked to the side where the bottle came from, and I zipped down the hill at ever-increasing speed, and then I saw him standing on the road above the underpass. It was the same creepy guy smiling the same smile and waving at me. Just before I hit the wall, I heard him yell after me, and what he said turned me cold.
"Can't wait to make a model out of you now."
That was the last thing I heard before I hit the wall. That guy had been waiting for me and knew both who I was and what route I would take home. I was found down at the base of the hill 3 hours later by my father, who had come searching for me after I hadn't returned home and he had heard from the shift supervisor I had left earlier. I was covered head to waist in blood. My right ear had almost been torn off by the helmet straps, and I had 3 fractured vertebrae in my neck. The strangest part was I was found propped up against the wall with my bike beside me and the blood-covered helmet in my lap, like I was posing for some biking magazine, with a trail of blood leading from where I crashed and where I was found. I thought that was the last of this until a week later, after recovering at home, I went out to check my mail and found a letter in the box addressed to me with no return address. Inside were 2 photos, and a note on one of the photos was of me sprawled out against the wall after my crash, and the other one of me posed like I was found against the wall. On the note were the words, "I told you I'd make your model."
Number 3.
Let me start off by saying that I'm a male in my mid-20s. I have a wife and a young daughter, and I live in Las Vegas. About a year ago, I found myself waking up at odd hours of the night, unable to fall back to sleep. It was starting to affect my performance at work, which was at the time working for the US government at Nellis Air Force Base. I went to my doctor, who was convinced that my inability to sleep was due to stress and anxiety caused by my profession. To my surprise, he started me on antidepressants that same day after a very short appointment, which seemed odd, being that I didn't claim to be depressed or anxious. I figured that my doctor knew best and decided to follow through with the prescribed medication, anything to help me get a full night's rest. Not long after taking the antidepressants, my mood started to swing up and down, and I started having brief but acute hallucinations and delusions. The adverse reaction to the medication landed me in a psychiatric hospital for 10 days while I stabilized off that terrible drug. My time there was surreal, an experience I will never forget, one that I think about daily and I'm sure will stay with me for the rest of my life. After I arrived at the hospital, I was stripped of all my personal belongings beside my clothes, aside from my belt and shoestrings, which were seen as possible tools to end one's life. I was then led into the male wing of the hospital, where I saw some of the patients walking into walls, talking to themselves and drooling as they wandered aimlessly like zombies. I was terrified, but was comforted not long after arriving by my roommate, a kind young man named Scott. Scott had a very welcoming smile. His eyes were bright and he spoke rather intelligently, at least for someone you would encounter at your average loony bin. We discussed politics, played chess with a board and pieces we constructed out of paper, and we shared what seemed to be the same sense of humour. Scott told me he was admitted because he spit on a cop to get off the streets for a few nights. He told me that he had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia in high school and required high doses of antipsychotics to remain stable. This would explain why he seemed so normal at the time, being that they line you up to give you meds to ensure that you swallow them. Scott got me through 10 days of shitty group therapies, shitty meals, and dismal living conditions. When my time was up, I gave my phone number, email address, and Facebook information to him, genuinely thinking of him as a good person and a friend I could have for life. That changed shortly after leaving. It had been a week since I was released, and everything seemed back to normal. My family life was on the mend, and I was starting to forget all about my little vacation to the psych ward. That was, until I received a text from a strange number. It was Scott. He informed me that he was released after 28 days and was headed to a government-funded assistance living home for psych patients transitioning back into society. I texted him back, congratulating him on his freedom and wished him the best of luck. He texted me back immediately telling me that he wanted to meet up with me. I let him know that unfortunately, with a family and full-time job, I was too busy to drive to the other side of town to see him on such short notice. This didn't please him, but he said he understood and that he would be in touch. I received a Facebook friend request from him within minutes of the phone call, and without any concern, I accepted. What was strange was that Scott didn't have any other friends on his list but myself. But I shrugged it off and decided he may have just created the account and I was his first friend. A week went by and every day I received multiple messages from Scott urging me to see him. His messages started making little sense. He started referring to himself as the Son of God, saying that he could change my life if I became his disciple. I responded to one of his messages and asked him if he had stopped taking his medication, and sure enough he had stopped. He stopped sending me messages after I started to ignore him. About a week later, Scott started posting rants on his Facebook talking about how he was God and that his wrath should be feared by all. I was still Scott's only friend. Many of these rants seemed to be directed toward me, and I immediately regretted giving him my personal information. One night around 2 a.m, I woke up to my dogs barking aggressively. I look at my phone to check the time and I noticed I had received a text from Scott only seconds before I awoke. It read,
"Hide and seek is over, my friend. Ignoring me was a mistake. By the way, your wife is very pretty. Knock knock."
At that very moment, I heard 2 very large pounds coming from what sounded like my backyard window. I remember in horror that my wife had fallen asleep on the living room couch that night, which is directly underneath the window that those bangs were coming from. She, to my relief, came bolting into the bedroom screaming about a hooded man in our backyard. I grabbed my gun and ran downstairs, and there he was, in our yard with a childlike smile on his face and a small kitchen knife in his hand. I told my wife to call 911 and lock the door behind me as I entered the backyard. Scott then looked confused and ashamed as he saw me emerge from inside my house. He apologized incoherently and repeatedly as I tried to calm him down and stall to allow time for the police to arrive.
"Scott, it's going to be okay. You're fine. Please put the knife down,"
I pleaded. He paused before looking me in the eye and calmly said something like,
"I'm a martyr. You are my disciple. This is the beginning. This is the end."
Over and over again. Slowly, he started to raise the knife up to eye level while continuously chanting those haunting words. I heard the door open up behind me. It was the police. Before they could get a word out, Scott held the small kitchen knife to his throat and started sawing away at his tender flesh. The blood squirted out immediately like a garden hose. It was truly the most gruesome thing I had ever witnessed firsthand. He didn't get very far before the police got the knife away from him, cuffed him, and immediately started first aid by applying pressure to the wound. Scott survived. His family had him admitted to a long-term mental hospital in Utah, from my understanding. My family and I have a restraining order against Scott and hope to never see him again. I later found out that Scott was able to figure out where I lived through a Facebook post in which my wife tagged myself and our location as we visited a popular restaurant on the Las Vegas Strip. Scott drove to the location tagged in the post. He spotted us and then followed us home with a car he had borrowed from his mother, who he was visiting that day. I urge all those who may listen to this story to be more careful of who has your personal information and what you post on social media. Your life may depend on it.
Number 2.
So, a couple of things you'll need to know. At the time this happened, around 2006 or 2007, right before large chunks of the old hospital got torn down. One of the buildings that is not demolished was what we were told to be the women's ward, and it had at least 4 floors, and the building itself was well over 100,000 square feet, and from years and years of abuse and neglect had been in a state of what I like to think was decay. My friend and I had been going there for years, and this night we had gotten brave and wanted to visit the sites we had not been to yet, mainly the women's ward, which had been said to be hellish for women who spent any amount of time on the 3rd floor, and was charmingly nicknamed the body tunnel, which looked remarkably similar to one that bodies got piled up in who died from TB and other serious illnesses in the early 1900s. So we set out for the ground around midnight and managed to slip past the seriously disinterested cops who were posted there to guard this hellhole. Once we made it in, we headed straight for the body tunnel, and let me stress this as harshly as I can, this tunnel has a stench so thick in it that it still smells like decomposition and rot so badly that you literally need a respirator to mitigate the taste even slightly. So about halfway down this tunnel, after stopping to vomit a couple of times, we are suddenly face to face with someone else down there. This person, or at least we thought it was another person, had been standing at the far end of the tunnel, just standing there. And if I had not reflected the smell enough, it is nearly impossible to stand stock still in this place without some sort of breathing aid, or the loss of smell and taste. Yet, here is this man, standing there casually, and not moving or reacting at all. We could not make out any feature on this person, almost like they were a solid shadow. And after about 5 minutes, we tried to rush back out the way we came. We made it about 50 feet when we noticed another man, the same shadowy shape, and the same unwavering stare towards us. And by this point, one of my friends, let's call her Sarah, noticed that no one was behind us any longer. Slightly disturbed at this point, we thought we either set off towards this weirdo or we try to turn around and head back again. So, being an idiot, I said, fuck it, I'll rush out and just shoulder check this guy if he stayed there. I made it probably 10 feet from the guy and ducked my head down and found myself falling out of the tunnel into the grass. No one in my way or under me. My friends looked pale as hell when they left and explained to me that when I connected with the man, he just vanished. Not 1 minute later, we heard a deathly shriek come from the tunnel and all of us booked it out of there. Another couple of hours of wandering around, we finally made it to the old woman's ward. After walking in, we immediately were harassed by all manner of noises. Everything from banging all around us to old junk laying from being slid and thrown around violently. And as if this weren't enough, we hear screaming every so often coming from all directions. Tortured haunting and painful screams, the kind of thing you expect to hear in a torture chamber. Well, this continued until we made it up to the 3rd floor. And then, like a switch flipped, everything fell silent. Or so we thought. About halfway down the 3rd floor hallway, we started to hear something moving about. Running into the old shit laying around, knocking over some of the chairs and bottles left laying about by others who had ventured in. But much the same as the sounds, this seemed to just die down naturally, like whatever it was stopped creeping around us. All this time, Sarah, Mike and myself had not seen anything at all, but Mike's girlfriend Becca had been too terrified to tell us she had. She would later tell Mike and I that all through the ward she had seen people about a foot away screaming right at her like caged animals almost. And when she heard the thing creeping around, Becca had said that she saw something that looked somewhat like an old raggedy woman that seemed to be crawling like something straight out of the Exorcism movie, and the woman was constantly making fixed eye contact with Becca. But she eventually lost track of the hell hag and we continued on almost completely undisturbed until out of the clear blue, we hear Becca scream bloody murder and break down into a panic, begging to be let out. So we tried our hardest to rush her out. All the while, it sounded like we wiped the entire ward into a frenzy. Doors slamming, screaming, laughing, banging, and more was heard the entire way through the ward, back to the stairwell we had used to come up. All the while, Becca was shouting not to let that bitch take her back there, not to let that bitch touch her again. Well, we made it out safely and kept running. We finally stopped and were able to calm Becca down. When we finally got a straight sentence out of her, she told us her back was killing her. When we looked at her back, it was a bloody mess, with 6 deep gouges all over her back, dug fairly deep and all drenched in blood. She looked like a right mess, and was refusing to tell us what she saw, just begging to get the fuck out of there.
Number 1.
I was 15, my name's Jessica, and my brother Jonathan was 17. This took place in a safe, affluent suburb of Detroit. I was living with my dad in Phoenix while I was recovering from a brain tumor. My grandmother, who had a very large presence in our lives, offered to have my brother live with her and her husband, so he doesn't have to move schools for his last year of high school. This was not very unusual for my granny to help and offer. In fact, before my accident, I slept over nearly every Friday night for Shabbat dinner. I loved her so much, and so did my brother. We felt so comfortable with her. She was like one of our parents. My mother has always been suicidal and mentally unstable. My mother had a hard time raising us kids, so my grandmother stepped in a lot. I'm 18 now, and I still don't have any answers as to why she did what she did. What really freaked me out was the timing. Just weeks before, she and my brother visited me in Phoenix Children's Hospital for days. She was feeding me home-cooked meals, reading my books and magazines, and checking on my car from the nurses. Several days after my brother and Granny returned home, my dad and I scheduled to move back home so I could start my physical therapy there. Everyone was glad we were coming back home. My Granny killed my brother 5 days before we were moving out. While it is unfortunate, I understand that parents, spouses, kids, or even grandparents kill their loved ones. But my grandmother's story is very strange because suddenly she gunned down my brother while he was dying on the phone with 911. This showed she was relentless and wanted to finish him off no matter how incriminating, sickening, or cruel. Once in a while I will review his 911 tape recording because it is the only way I can hear his voice again. It is sad to think that a loving Jewish grandmother would snap like this. There was no reason as to why she wanted to kill her grandson. She just snapped, or maybe she was suppressing her desires for so long she couldn't hold it in any longer. My mum suspects after this tragedy that my grandmother also poisoned her own mother, because she insisted that her mother was going to die that night, and her last meal was matzo ball soup. I digress. You can listen to his call here. Listen at your own risk. Having a video like this conditions people and makes them sympathize with the right person, the person who died. You can clearly learn from the tape who the real crazed devil is. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, did you make it through all to the way, guys? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. I would just like to give a huge shout out to everyone who has been sending stories in. Thank you all so much, and don't be discouraged if yours did not make it in this time around, as there will be plenty more opportunities in the future. And if you haven't submitted a story yet, you can send me a story in my email, which I'll leave in the description below. A big shout out also goes to James Riley from Freak Static for his amazing thumbnail. There's a link in the description so you guys can go check out his work and show him heaps of support. Thanks for being patient with this one, guys, as well. These larger videos do take some time, and when I do the subscriber stories, I always want to try and make them as good as I possibly can, given that they're your stories. As always, guys, thank you all so much for your support. The hive is still growing rapidly, and I have all of you to thank for that. And on that note, it would be awesome if you could like, share, subscribe if you're new, and let me know what you'd like to see in the future. You can catch me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram throughout the week, all of which I've left links in the description below for. Also, guys, I just wanted to give you all the heads up that there are a lot of B-Buster mimic channels and websites showing up. So I just wanted to put this out there to save you guys a whole lot of potential hassle and problems. If you guys don't hear directly from this channel about something I'm doing and a direct announcement from me here, then don't trust it, as I'll always let you guys know what's going on. Alright guys, I won't make this video any longer. Thank you all once again for your stories and support. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you mates in the next one.